Okay, last night, Labour came third in Gorton and Denton, Greater Manchester. In a seat they won 51% of the vote just 18 months ago. The Greens won with 41%. Reform came in second with 29%. Labour got 25% of the vote, down from 51%, as I said, 18 months ago. This was not a low turnout protest vote. Turnout matched the general election. People showed up, they just didn't vote for Labour. Political scientist John Curtis called it a seismic moment. Today I want to break down two things. First, why Reform's core message on immigration does not hold up when you follow the facts. And second, why Labour's losing the argument, not because their position is wrong, but because they're not making it clearly enough. Because both of those things are happening at the same time, and together they are creating conditions for what happened last night. Reform's entire political identity rests on two things: immigration and the cost of living. Farage connects them constantly, claiming Labour's lost control of the borders, that immigration's out of control, and that the current government is responsible. So let's start with immigration, because the facts here would just blow your mind. Brexit, which Farage campaigned for and won and still celebrates, was sold on one central promise: taking back control of our borders, remember? And here is what actually happened. Net migration nearly doubled, not despite it, but partly because of it. When free movement ended, employers in health, social care and hospitality filled those gaps from further afield under a visa system the Conservative government had expanded, produced the numbers that Reform now campaigns against. But here's the part that is almost never discussed honestly: the small boats. Before Brexit, the UK was part of something called the Dublin Regulation. That's the legal framework that allowed us to return asylum seekers to the first EU country that they arrived in. The moment that we left on January 1st, 2021, we lost that right entirely. In 2018, before Brexit, 299 people crossed the channel in small boats. By 2022, it was 45,000. The correlation is no coincidence. Professor Tom Brooks of Durham University explained it clearly. He said the Dublin Regulation had a deterrent effect. When the ability to legally return people to EU countries was removed, small boats took off, as we've seen. Now, what can Reform actually do about it? Their position is simple: just remove them, mass deportations, send them back. But the legal reality, and this applies to Labour too, which I'll come back to, you cannot just remove somebody without a bilateral returns agreement with their country of origin. You cannot just remove somebody under the legal framework of a live asylum claim under the 1951 Refugee Convention, which the UK signed up to and is legally bound to. You cannot just remove somebody to a country where they face persecution or death under what's known as the principle of non-refoulement. You cannot just override our courts. Do you remember the Conservatives' Rwanda scheme, the Conservative government's flagship policy? And that was ruled unlawful by the UK Supreme Court. Cost us £700 million and removed absolutely not one single person.
So the Gorton Denton by-election is a victory. Yes, it's a victory for sectarian voting. It's a victory for cheating in elections.
Okay, so that was Farage responding to coming second last night, claiming cheating. The evidence? Nothing at all. Nothing at all. And not what he did not mention: Brexit. And he never does anymore. Reform has no credible immigration policy. What they have is a grievance that they created, and now they're running on it. Now to the cost of living. The Reform are campaigning on this hard, and it lands because people are struggling. 92% of households report a cost of living increase and say food bills have gone up. But again, let's follow where that actually comes from. The UK is in a changing Europe, and remember, I've got a master's degree in economics. The leading independent academic body on Brexit's economic impact, drawing on major 2025 research, found that by 2025, Brexit had reduced UK GDP per capita by 6 to 8%. Business investment was down between 12 and 18%. The Office for Budget Responsibility, the government's own independent watchdog, was the long-run productivity loss at 4%. And the chain is simple. Brexit raises trade barriers. Trade barriers raise costs for businesses. Businesses pass these costs on. Prices go up. Higher inflation means the Bank of England has to increase interest rates. Higher interest rates means higher mortgages, less investment and less jobs. And what I've just described is a cost of living crisis, sadly. And Brexit runs through every single link of that chain. And Farage created it. He was at the centre of it. He was the daddy of it. And we can all remember. And he's campaigning on it. And too many people still aren't connecting those two things. Okay, now I'm just going to be absolutely upfront on Labour too. Because the answer to reform's dishonesty is not Labour's silence, and Labour now absolutely mute. Do you remember how they handled the digital ID policy? Now, I work as a manager in housing, and I've got years of experience of working on the front line. I deal with false claims about right to work and entitlement. A proper digital verification system aligned with what most of Europe already does makes complete practical sense. It could cut through a lot of the misinformation. What you got to imagine is, if you've got a birth certificate as somebody's proof of ID and no picture that goes along with it, it could be absolutely anybody, and that's just a fraction of the potential corruption in the system. And it could cut through a lot of that type of misinformation. But it was announced without context, without proper explanation, without a cost plan. And then 4 months later they had to drop it, and I can only blame them. And I understand how it comes across, especially with all the money which is coming through to try and discredit the left and move the whole country to the right, whether it makes sense or not, regardless of any cost to us as a country and our intrinsic values over the decades. So essentially, the vacuum that was left by Labour's silence got filled by conspiracy theories, surveillance states, you may remember, China-style social credit. Almost 3 million people signed a petition against it, not because the idea was fundamentally wrong, but because nobody made the case for it. And it happens again and again and again by Labour. And somehow they can't see it coming, and I know they're going to do it again. That's not the public's failure, it's a communication failure, which makes it even more frustrating. And the same pattern is playing out on immigration. The legal constraints are real, the refugee convention is real, the non-refoulement is real, the loss of the Dublin Regulation is real. The reason we can only return about 60 small boat arrivals a year to the EU countries compared to 130 before is a direct consequence of decisions made by the previous government, known as Conservative government. Starmer inherited that. It needs to be said clearly and repeatedly, but it's not. Okay, so let's bring it up to date. So the UK-France one-for-one returns deal from July 2025 is a sort of genuine step forward. But the work to get some more meaningful returns agreement with EU partners is real, still to come, and ongoing. But Starmer isn't defending it publicly. He's not explaining it. He's not in front of the camera saying, this is what we inherited, this is what was broken by Brexit, this is what we're rebuilding, this is not legally possible, and why. He doesn't need to explain every single convention. He doesn't need to give a lecture, but he does need to show up. Live television, unscripted, direct questions, answer them directly. That's not weakness. That's what government looks like. That's what strong leadership looks like. And hopefully one day, my gosh, the light bulb will go on and he'll realise where he's failing and what the hell he needs to do. Where are his advisors? Oh my gosh. Okay, so just to summarise, here's my honest reading of what's happening. Starmer is governing. Some of his decisions, believe it or not, are the right ones, but he's losing the argument because he refuses to have the argument in public. And that gap between what the government is doing and what it's communicating is the gap that Reform walks through all day, every day with no accountability, and their policies don't need to make sense. It just needs to sound along the lines of what people have been led to believe is the most important thing to them that they weren't even thinking about as a main priority end of 2024. Gorton and Denton is a warning. If the same pattern repeats in the May local elections, Labour is squeezed from the left by the Green Party and from the right by Reform, that is no longer a protest vote. That is a structural problem, and structural problems don't fix themselves. So drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Reform's immigration argument holds up when you follow the facts back to their source? And do you think Starmer can turn this around before May? Subscribe if you find this kind of straight analysis useful. See you in the next one.